talking to Scott Adams, who is, the legendary cartoonist who created Dilbert. But what's interesting about Scott Adams is not what he's created. It's kind of what he's become, which is kind of an unusual political public intellectual, which I don't know if you accidentally back into that position, Scott, if you saw it coming. But what happened was you pretty much predicted how the whole political election went, how the season went, while people were either snarking at you and saying you didn't know what was going on, and yet it all occurred according to your plan. And I found out about you kind of by accident, in the sense that I was listening to a lecture by a guy who suggested a book by Cialdini, Influence. So I go and I buy the book. And I read it and I go, wow, this sounds a lot like Trump. So I write these 3 articles for Fox News about Trump and influence, and I post them. And this guy tweets at me, you should probably go read Scott Adams. And I go, And so I go to look and I go, so everything that I thought I'd come to conclusions about, you'd already reached a long time ago. And my stuff looked incredibly stale and stupid. And I'm like, wait, everything I thought was an epiphany, Scott Adams had already written about.
I had another advantage over you in that sometimes, as you know, authors will send their book to another author before it's published to just get maybe some good blurbs. So I had already seen Cialdini's second book, Persuasion, before it was published. So I was seeing that over the summer, and I was looking at this, and I'm thinking, oh no, this is important. I need to write about this.
Well, if some of these listeners aren't aware, explain how you got interested in the Trump phenomenon, and how it kind of for you anyway, it's kind of changed who you are, I think, or how people perceive you. And I was also wondering is how it's affected you with professional or personal relationships.
Oh, well, it's been a disaster in terms of my personal relationships and my income. I used to have a very robust speaking career. Mm-hmm. I had been one of the most highly paid professional speakers on the circuit. And about the time I started writing about Trump, the offers went to zero. It just immediately dissolved. And I don't think it was so much about Trump as the fact is if you take a side, right, a big corporation doesn't want you on the stage. So I understood that, and I knew that was going to happen. But my background is I'm a trained hypnotist. Mm-hmm. So when I was in my 20s, I went to school to become a hypnotist and learned how to do that. And I've been studying the ways of influence and persuasion for years. It's part of what I do professionally, because when you're writing or drawing comics, persuasion is always part of that texture. And so when I saw Trump emerge on the scene, I just started noticing technique that I hadn't quite noticed before. And it really came together when he did the famous now Rosie O'Donnell play. Right. And in that first debate, for those listening who are not familiar with it, when Megyn Kelly asked him the gotcha question, mm-hmm. What about the terrible things you said about women? Nobody could have gotten out of this trap. No normal politician can get out of that. That is the end of their path right there. And Trump just did something so amazingly effective that I actually stood up and walked toward the television. I actually got out of my chair because I said, "This is not normal." So when he brought up Rosie O'Donnell, I saw it as visual persuasion. I saw it as moving the energy to a question that's far more interesting than the question that was asked. And it was just a whole other level of persuasion that you just don't see. And so that tuned me into it. And then when he started doing his linguistic kill shots, first with low energy Jeb, mm-hmm. the moment I saw that, I wrote a blog and said, Jeb Bush is done. It took months for people to realize that he really was done. Mm-hmm. But because of my background, I could see it on day one. Yeah,
it's when it's like Trump would throw something like a wad of gum on you that you can never get off. And the more you struggle with that wad of gum, the more people pay attention to that wad of gum. It's like, I am not low energy. And if you keep saying that, people go, well, maybe he is low energy. To your point, when in the early I'd met Trump a couple of times, and I'd gone to Trump Tower right before he declared that he was going to run, and we talked about what he was going to do. And I was really excited because I thought he was just such an interesting person and a character, and he was an early supporter of mine. He used to watch Red Eye, which is a show that was on at 3 a.m. because the guy doesn't sleep, so he would watch my show. So I really liked him, and then he started to piss me off when he would say things like about the John McCain stuff, and I realized that he was actually kind of exposing my own, I guess, hypocrisy, because I was like getting mad that he was saying things as jokes that I felt I could get away with, but he couldn't. And then the moment that I kind of like re-educated myself and said, this isn't a campaign, it's a Comedy Central roast, and he's treating it like a roast, then everything that he was saying suddenly made sense to me, and that it was, and that America had actually beaten me to this, that I was like the last person to find out. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's a little bit of I thought there was a regional quality to Trump's sense of humor. So I grew up in upstate New York.
Right.
And maybe you can relate to this from your New York experience as well. But sometimes when New Yorkers are laughing at a joke, they're not really laughing at the subject of the joke, the person who's being made fun of.
Right.
They're laughing at the awfulness of the comment.
Exactly.
So the John McCain joke, and it was definitely a joke, that Trump made about, he prefers the ones that didn't get caught. The reason it's funny is because it's so outlandishly inappropriate to say that about a war hero.
Absolutely.
So the only reason it's funny is because you do respect the war hero.
Right.
If you didn't, the joke doesn't work. So if you get that, then it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, it is. And I didn't get it. And I think I did, I didn't get it because I wasn't used to seeing where it came from, or the context was so alien to me where he said it. Like I thought about that joke. If he were on Comedy Central and they were roasting John McCain, and he got up there and he says, "Yeah, he's a good guy, but I prefer my heroes not to get caught," people would laugh. I would laugh because of the context. So I had to teach myself that Trump was saying, "I'm not going to buy this context."
Watch how often he does that. I call it shaking the box. Because if you're a master persuader, as I call President Trump, he'll go into a situation and the first thing he does is change all the rules. He just takes the box and he shakes it.
Right.
And then when the box is shaken, everybody's confused and they're looking for certainty. And who provides the certainty? Donald Trump.
Right.
So if he can confuse everybody else and remain the clearest, simplest, cleanest message, people just gravitate to it.
Now, I'm wondering, if you had gone in the opposite direction, the media would have embraced you, correct? You did say that, like, it's about making a choice, and people don't like that. But if you had actually gone all in on Bernie Sanders or Hillary, I don't think you would have had the same negative response.
Probably true, yes. There was definitely a socially acceptable choice in this election, which I don't think we've ever seen before to quite this extent, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's why I started early on predicting that there would be something called a shy Trump voter, the people who couldn't even admit it within their own household. If they got a call from a polling company, they'd look around and say, who was watching? Hillary or is it Gary Johnson? That sort of thing.
Yeah. It's like a political version of gentleman's bladder. You don't know what gentleman's bladder is? That's when you can't.
No, but
it sounds great, but it's not. It's like you can't urinate in a public bathroom.
Oh, I have that.
Yeah,
shy bladder.
Yeah, exactly. I have that too. I don't know where. I think that's from going to too many baseball games as a kid, and going into Candlestick Park. I think that scarred me for life.
I am likewise scarred for life from that same experience. For those who haven't been there, it's literally a trough.
It is.
It's a trough.
It's the worst.
And you stand there shoulder to shoulder, and you're looking at each other thinking, "This is normal. This is normal."
Yeah, I do not understand how my dad did not understand how, like, the height difference. Like when you go in there, how close you are to things, and it's just. I think after that, the first chance I got to use a bathroom, it was just going to be by myself, and it was like a psychological triumph. Terrible. How did we get onto that? But I have to say, I enjoy your periscopes too, because I find them oddly soothing. They're kind of like, I turn them on. You kind of walk your way through kind of a blunt, practical philosophy of persuasion, or you even talk about philosophy. Like, you'll talk about the philosophy of success. For example, you talk about how goal, like I agree with, I've never had a goal in my life, and you've written basically a book on this, and I've seen talks of yours where you will talk about how goals are bad, systems are far superior, or systems are good, goals are bad. And I wonder if you could just expand on that, because I've been following that all my life, but no one's ever explained it.
So goals are good in a situation where you either have a constrained artificial situation. So let's say a bowling tournament.
Yeah.
The goal is to win the tournament. All right, that's good. It's good to have a goal. But in the real world, what's happening even next week is so unpredictable that even if you had a goal, chances are you wouldn't like that same goal next week. Things are changing. So when you have a complicated, ever-changing environment, what you want to do is simply increase your odds of being successful in the most possible ways. So one of those systems that I talk about is the talent stack, stacking up the talents that make sense together, not just random things you've learned, but they make sense as a combination. Because then you go into the world with a whole bunch of options, and the world will eventually serve up something that looks pretty good. So if you play a system, you're increasing your odds of success no matter what happens.
Right.
And that's probably good in a chaotic environment.
Yeah. And when you think about it, it makes complete sense. I also find that, like, goals make you feel terrible if you don't meet them.
Yeah, the whole time you're working toward a goal, you're in a state of pre-failure or haven't quite succeeded. But a system would be something like the one I'll be using today, which is I always do something active, whether I call that going to the gym or cleaning the garage, and I don't make an exception, no matter how I feel. So that makes me feel successful every day.
Right.
And there are days when I literally drive to the gym, walk into the gym, stand there in the center of the lobby, and I look around and say, nope.
Yeah.
And I literally turn directly around and walk out to my car and drive home. But I don't feel like a failure.
Yeah.
Because my system is to try to do something every day.
Yeah.
So the system is on track. And in the long run, that always pays off.
It's like when I was much younger, in my 20s, every time I sat down to write, the goal was to get published, which was stupid. When the goal or the system is you just get up and write a little bit, just write and write anything.
Yeah.
And
right.
Sooner or later, it happens.
Yeah, the system is gradual improvement. That's always going to make you feel good.
Yeah, I mean, the show I did, Red Eye, was so awful in the beginning, but I had to show up and do it every day. Gradually, it got better. But it was just like the idea that you were going to step in and do an amazing show is an impossibility.
Most things fail.
Yes.
Just period, right?
Yeah.
That's the end. I didn't need to finish that. Just most things fail.
That's true.
So if you're attacking life as I'm going to make these things succeed every time, you're going to have a terrible experience. But if you're thinking that every failure, if chosen wisely, makes you smarter for the next project, at least you learned something, you made some connections while you were failing.
Right.
It's not really the same kind of failure.
Yeah.
So for example, now I'm building a studio upstairs to do some YouTube stuff, doing what you're doing now.
Yeah.
And I'm failing like crazy. For 2 months, I haven't been able to get this stuff to work. The technology is just baffling. But I'm going to come away with this with a whole new set of skills that work really well with the other stuff I do. So there is no failure path given the system I'm using.
Do you know what? I fail at smoking pot, and I bring this up to you because of that amazing 3-hour podcast you did with Joe Rogan. I don't know how Joe Rogan, by the way, can do a 3-hour podcast. I don't understand it unless he is high all the time. But you got high with him, and you made it a very important. The whole podcast was great, and I encourage everybody to find it. What was frustrating for me is what you said is that you don't encourage people to smoke it because not everybody can smoke it. I'm one of those people. I cannot enjoy marijuana, and I find that to be like such an injustice because it seems like possibly the most relaxing thing after watching that podcast.
Well, let me just say this about that. I do not recommend that anybody try any illegal drugs because I'm not a doctor, and you should have a doctor telling you these things.
Yes.
But it is nonetheless true that there are lots of different varieties of marijuana, and they're very different. So if you got the wrong kind for your personality or what you were trying to accomplish, it would be a bad experience.
Yeah, I've had those bad experiences. And I had good ones back in the day when it was very weak. Like in the late 70s, I was in like grade school or, let's say junior high and high school. And it was the worst. And marijuana was, you bought it by the joint. It cost $1 and it was probably parsley. You were probably cheated by a junior in high school. But nothing bad ever happened. But then later in life, the stuff is like on steroids. It's like crazy. I'm terrified of it.
Well, the big thing, though, is were you aware that there are two main types? One keeps you awake and happy and creative, and the other puts you asleep. So if you're looking for one effect and getting the other one, you're going to be pretty unhappy.
Yeah, it just made me hyper paranoid. So I don't know which one it is, but I thought I was going to die. I just immediately I went from total relaxation to I think I'm going to die. So as a favor to all my friends, I just don't do that drug. But I was listening to your I think it was your Periscope yesterday, and I was really interested in your theories on eternity and will humans live forever, that sort of thing. And you were talking about the integration of, say, like chips into the human brain. But you said something that I thought was interesting. You could live forever, but without consciousness, which you don't mind because you felt that consciousness was overrated. I've never heard anybody. So how can you live forever without consciousness?
Well, a software simulation of you that acted like you and had the same preferences and went on, even maybe in a physical form, if it someday is ported to a robot body, would be you for all practical purposes, but not the parts that you care about and have an emotional connection to.
Right.
So I think consciousness probably is little more than the ability to forecast what is going to happen to you personally next, in the next moment, and then compare what you thought was going to happen to what happened.
Right.
So that difference is pretty much just your consciousness. And you could certainly program that into a computer to say, well, given what I know, I think this will happen next. Oh, it didn't. How do I feel about that? This makes me stressful. This makes me whatever. So you could program that, I think.
Wow, that's amazing. I was thinking when you were talking about eternity without or living forever without consciousness, I would think that would be something like a literary achievement. So like if you're like Shakespeare lives forever without consciousness, Dilbert will live forever without Scott Adams' consciousness.
Better than that. There's now enough video and recordings and writings of me from spanning over 20 years, and this will be true of you as well, that it will be completely practical for a future generation to recreate me. And indeed, I would be surprised if there isn't some hobbyist somewhere who doesn't create me in the future. There might be lots of.
And actually, that future could be now. Like you could be a simulation. You've talked about this before, that it's more likely that you are a simulation than not a simulation, correct?
Yeah, let's put credit on this with a real physicist. I think Nick Bostrom is the one who talks
superintelligence.
Yeah. So I'll give you the dumb guy's version of a smart idea. So my version of this, with my own flavor of it, is if it will ever be possible for humans in our current form to create simulations that internally to the simulation believe they are real, whatever that means for software, then it is likely that it already happened and that we are one of the simulations. Because the odds are that whoever creates that first simulation, it won't be the only one they make. It will probably be thousands and thousands of them. So for every sufficiently advanced civilization, there could be thousands to billions of simulations, depending on how aggressive they were in making them. So just math alone tells you we're more likely a simulation that believes it's real than an original species.
Now, could you, this is almost a replacement for God, right? When you say it's kind of, for some people, it could be, like, you could actually argue that, okay, I'm not really going to die. It offers some kind of relief that I'm not just going to disappear, that I might just show up again.
I wouldn't use a replacement. The language I like to use is a filter. So my belief is that human beings did not evolve to understand their reality. Let's say that we're the real ones and we're the organic, original species. Chances are we did not evolve to understand the reality underlying everything we're doing. If we did, we wouldn't all have different religions. We wouldn't, half of the world wouldn't think Trump is Hitler, while the other half think, hey, I'm going to get a better job. These are completely different illusions. So evolution only cared that you were able to reproduce. And you can see that you can stand next to somebody in the grocery store who thinks they reincarnated from a 14th century monk, and you think that your savior walked on water and cured some lepers. Those are different realities. But you two could get together and have a baby. So evolution is completely happy that one of you or both of you is totally wrong about what's going on here. All right. So given that world, what we do is our brains generate these movies in our head. I call it a movie just for simplicity, but it's a filter on how we filter our experience. So I think the idea that we are software simulations is a filter that is a good one under the following two conditions. It does a good job of predicting what will happen next, and it makes you happy while you're waiting. Right? So if those two qualities are happening, then you've got a good filter. There are a lot of people, for example, whose filter on life is that Trump is Hitler. It makes them very unhappy, and they're probably not going to do a good job of predicting because I don't think he's going to go full Hitler. So that's an ineffective filter that kept them alive, but it didn't keep them very happy.
It's interesting to try to persuade people out of their filters. It's like trying to talk somebody off a ledge. I have friends, and I'm sure you do, that have gone so far into the Trump is Hitler or Trump is evil thing that, like, that you're trying to say you can't reason with them. If no matter what. I have a comedian friend who is I can't even be around him. He's like completely. It's sad because he's smart. He's way smarter than me, but he can't see it. The filter has screwed him up.
I think it has moved from a thing that people could make decisions about into almost a lifestyle choice.
Yes.
And once you've decided your lifestyle choice is you hate Donald Trump, it's just hard to get out of your lifestyle.
It is. It's an orientation. It really is, and pretty soon it will be victim status. Speaking of which, I want to end this. I've kept you on for 25 minutes, and I wanted to ask you about what went on in Berkeley. What your take was over the weekend? I didn't think there were any winners in that craziness. And I know you're in the East Bay. I love the East Bay. I don't get to Berkeley as much as I used to, but it just seems so strange. It's like what do you call it when people like not Dungeons and Dragons, but where people reenact? They're like doing reenactments of riots.
Cosplay.
Yes.
Cosplay.
Yes.
That's funny. That's I was waiting for my spot to jump in to use that exact word. I was going to the same place. But generally speaking, if the participants to your political demonstration are trying to decide what costume to wear, right. it is no longer a political statement. You've moved from politics to theater and entertainment, and I would go further to say that most of the people who probably went to that either wanted to punch someone or, and I think this is a real thing, I'm saying this seriously, wanted to be punched. Because I've actually heard from real people who actually wanted to be punched, and not for political reasons. There are people who just, they've got pain. They have pain in their lives, and they're looking for something to, distract them.
Right.
So there were real people who wanted real punches in the face.
Wow.
And went there as a way to somewhat.
You know what?
Justifiable way to get it, I guess.
I was looking at it, and it felt like cosplay for like Mad Max. It was like you'd see a guy in a bike helmet holding a hockey stick, wearing soccer shin guards, and it was like a security guard fantasizing that he was a Navy SEAL or that it was the apocalypse, and it was hard to pick a side. It was just it's so strange, and I guess this Saturday Coulter's going to be there. It's going to be interesting. But is there anything you want to plug, Scott? I'm going to let you go because I kept you on for almost a half an hour. Is there anything we should be looking forward to? Your Periscope, by the way, people should check out because it's every day you do this, and it's interesting. You talk about Trump, you talk about life. It's a very the gist of it is you're answering questions from people.
Yeah, and it's amazingly personal,
Right?
Because I'm just holding the phone up to my face, and whatever happens, happens. If I need to blow my nose, I blow my nose in the middle of the periscope. So it's got that going for it.
Yeah.
But I would plug Dilbert.com, my website, and if you want to follow me on Twitter at Scott Adams Says, or my book How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big, you'll have more of me than you'll ever want.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you giving me this time. And I have to say, if you aren't aware of what Scott does, aside from Dilbert, you're missing out, because there's not a lot of people that can talk about society so that other people can understand them. Because a lot of this, when you bring up like Bostrom, which is, I mean, I've read his book, Superintelligence. It's hard to explain, but you explain it. So you're kind of I would call you a human philosophical translator. You take difficult concepts, you put them through the Scott Adams meat grinder, and it comes out, and people go, oh, yeah, that makes sense. So,
well, do you know what the other word for that is?
What?
Cartoonist.
Yes. By the way, that reminds me. My first job, kind of not real, well, second job, I was at Prevention Magazine in Rodale, which is in Emmaus, Pennsylvania, and I became their fitness editor. But one of my first things to do was to pick cartoons for the magazine, and it was depressing. There's a guy named Schwadron. Does that ring a bell?
No.
He was just thousands. He would send thousands, but I have to say that it was brutal. That was my job. So, I don't know.
Looking at bad cartoons all day?
Yes.
That does sound like a little slice of hell right there.
It did. It was. I felt I deserved it for something I'd done in my previous simulated past. All right, Scott, thank you so much. I appreciate it. And I hope one day if you ever get out here to come do the show, but I know you're too comfortable in California.
I'll get out there one of these days, and I'll do that.
Excellent, sir. Thank you. Take care.
All right.